Let's start with an uncomfortable question that most people avoid asking out loud. If earning more money is supposed to make life easier, why does it feel like so many people are still stuck, even after years of working, studying, and doing the right things? Not stuck in poverty, not struggling to survive, but stuck in a strange middle zone, earning enough to look stable from the outside, yet never quite feeling financially solid on the inside. Bills get paid, the lights stay on. There's food in the fridge, but savings feel fragile, progress feels slow, and the idea of building real wealth feels distant, almost abstract. This is the reality for a large share of middle-class and lower upper-middle-class earners across the United States and Europe. And it's especially true for those trying to reach their first meaningful milestone, the first $100,000 in net worth. The first $100,000 is often described as the hardest, but that phrase alone doesn't explain why so many people never get there. Roughly 3 out of 4 earners will spend their entire working lives without ever crossing that line, not because they're lazy, not because they lack intelligence, and not because they never earned enough. Many of them did everything society told them to do. They studied, got degrees or certifications, entered the workforce, climbed modest career ladders, and saw their salaries grow over time. Yet somehow, despite all that effort, the numbers never quite add up in their favor. Understanding why requires looking closely at a very ordinary, very familiar financial life. Picture a common scenario. A young professional in their late 20s or early 30s, living in a mid-sized American city or a European urban center. They're not rich, but they're not struggling either. Let's say they earn the equivalent of $65,000 a year before tax. In the US, after federal, state, and payroll taxes, that might come down to roughly $48,000 to $50,000 take home. In much of Europe, depending on the country, social contributions and income tax might reduce it to a similar range. On paper, that's a solid income. It's well above minimum wage, comfortably within the middle class, and often seen as a sign of success, especially compared to student years or entry-level jobs. Now let's look at where that money goes, because this is where the story really begins. Rent or a mortgage usually takes the first and largest bite. A modest apartment close enough to work, not luxury but not unsafe or inconvenient either, might cost $1,400 to $1,800 a month in the US or the European equivalent. That's already around $18,000 to $21,000 a year. Then comes transportation. Maybe it's a car payment, $350 to $500 a month plus insurance, fuel, and maintenance. Or perhaps it's public transport, which is cheaper but still not free. Add another $5,000 to $8,000 annually, easily more if there's a financed vehicle involved. Already over half of the after-tax income is gone. Next are the quieter expenses, the ones that don't feel dramatic but steadily drain cash. Student loan repayments, even modest ones, might be $200 to $400 a month. Credit cards used for convenience or emergencies slowly accumulate balances. Subscriptions pile up. Streaming services, cloud storage, fitness apps, productivity tools, music platforms. Groceries, dining out, occasional travel, clothes for work, replacing electronics every few years. None of these feel reckless on their own. In fact, most of them feel reasonable, normal, earned. By the time the month ends, maybe there's a few $100s left, some months none at all. This is where many people pause and say, well, this is just how life is now. And that belief is powerful because nothing in this picture looks like a mistake. There's no obvious financial disaster, no gambling problem, no extreme overspending. Just a series of socially accepted, widely encouraged choices that slowly consume nearly everything earned. The system feels tight but invisible, and because everyone around is living a similar life, it doesn't trigger alarm. It feels normal to earn more and spend more. It feels normal to upgrade lifestyles gradually. It feels normal to carry some debt into your 30s and 40s. Normal, however, is not the same as sustainable, and it's certainly not the same as wealth building. What's rarely discussed is how this lifestyle interacts with time and compounding. At this stage, many people believe that once their income rises a bit more, everything will fall into place. Savings will increase naturally. Investments will come later. The first $100,000 will happen eventually, maybe in their 40s. But this belief quietly assumes that expenses will stay flat while income rises. In reality, they usually rise together. A better job often comes with a better apartment. A promotion justifies a nicer car. A higher salary makes certain small luxuries feel harmless. Over time, the gap between earning and saving doesn't widen, it stays frustratingly narrow. This is why the first $100,000 isn't just a financial challenge, it's a psychological one. Before that milestone, money works mostly through effort. You trade hours for dollars. Progress feels linear and slow. There's very little visible help from compounding because the base is too small. If you save $300 a month, that's real discipline, but it doesn't feel transformative. It doesn't change your identity or your sense of security. And because the rewards are distant, the temptation to prioritize present comfort over future momentum is strong. Another layer that makes this harder is comparison. In the US and Europe, lifestyles are constantly visible. Social media, workplace norms, and peer groups quietly set spending benchmarks. The car you drive signals stability. The neighborhood you live in signals success. Even how often you travel or dine out becomes a subtle measure of progress. Opting out of these signals can feel like opting out of adulthood itself. So many people don't consciously choose lifestyle inflation, they absorb it. They adapt to what feels expected, not realizing how expensive expected really is over decades. By the time someone reaches their mid-30s, the pattern is often locked in. Income might be higher now, $80,000, maybe $90,000, but commitments are heavier too. Fixed costs have grown. Financial flexibility has shrunk. Savings exist, but they're scattered. A small emergency fund, some retirement contributions, maybe a bit of cash sitting idle. Net worth creeps upward, but slowly, often stalling far below six figures. At this point, the first $100,000 starts to feel less like a milestone and more like a mystery, something other people manage somehow. This is not a story about blame, it's a story about structure, about how ordinary financial decisions made within a system that rewards consumption and normalizes debt quietly delay the moment when money starts working for you instead of the other way around. Before understanding how financially intelligent people think differently, it's important to fully see this reality without judgment. Because awareness, not guilt, is what creates change. The hidden mistake that keeps most people from reaching their first $100,000 is not overspending in the dramatic sense. It's not luxury watches, yachts, or reckless gambling. It's something far quieter and far more socially acceptable. The mistake is allowing fixed lifestyle costs to rise to a point where time becomes the enemy of wealth, rather than its ally. Most people think the obstacle is not earning enough. In reality, it's locking too much of their future income into obligations that grow faster than their ability to save meaningfully. To understand this, we need to step away from emotions and look at very simple math. Not advanced investing theory, not market predictions, just arithmetic. Let's return to our earlier example, someone taking home around $4,000 a month after tax. If they save $300 a month consistently, that's $3,600 a year. Over 10 years, ignoring any investment returns, that's $36,000. Add modest returns, maybe it grows to $45,000 or $50,000. That sounds respectable, and it is. But it's still only halfway to $100,000 after a decade of disciplined saving. And that's assuming nothing goes wrong, no job loss, no health issues, no major life disruptions. Now contrast that with what happens when fixed costs quietly expand. A slightly better apartment adds $400 a month. A newer car adds another $300. A few lifestyle upgrades, eating out more often, better vacations, convenience spending absorb another $200. None of these feel extreme. Each one is justified individually. Together, they consume $900 a month. That's $10,800 a year. Money that could have gone toward building a financial base is now permanently assigned to maintaining a lifestyle. And because these are fixed or semi-fixed costs, they don't feel optional. They become the new baseline. This is where the system subtly works against the individual. Many modern financial products are designed to convert future income into present consumption. Car loans stretch to 6 or 7 years. Mortgages normalize 30-year commitments. Student loans follow people well into midlife. Credit cards smooth over cash flow gaps so efficiently that the cost is barely felt month to month. Each product, on its own, seems reasonable. Combined, they create a structure where a large portion of future earnings is already spoken for before the money even arrives. The real cost of this isn't just interest, although interest matters. The real cost is opportunity. If someone could redirect even $700 of those fixed monthly expenses toward building assets early in their career, the math changes completely. $700 a month is $8,400 a year. Over 10 years, that's $84,000 before returns. With modest compounding, it's very close to $100,000. The difference between reaching that milestone and missing it often comes down to whether those early years were used to build financial mass or to support a lifestyle that felt normal. What makes this mistake so persistent is that it doesn't feel like a mistake while it's happening. There's no sharp pain signal, no immediate consequence. In fact, there's often positive reinforcement. A nicer home feels good. A reliable newer car reduces stress. Being able to say yes to social plans feels like freedom. These rewards are immediate and tangible. The cost, delayed wealth, is abstract and distant. Humans are wired to prioritize the present over the future, especially when the future benefit is invisible. There's also a psychological narrative that reinforces this behavior, the idea that financial discipline can wait. Many people tell themselves a story that goes something like this: I'm still early in my career, I'll save more later. Or once I earn a bit more, this won't be an issue. The problem is that later rarely arrives in the way people imagine. Income increases tend to be gradual, while lifestyle adjustments happen quickly. And once a higher standard of living is established, stepping back feels like loss, even if the original standard was perfectly adequate. Another psychological factor is identity. In the US and much of Europe, adulthood is associated with certain visible markers: living independently, owning a car, traveling occasionally, having a well-furnished home. These markers are deeply tied to self-respect and social belonging. Choosing a cheaper option, even temporarily, can feel like admitting failure or falling behind. So people don't frame their decisions as financial trade-offs. They frame them as personal necessities. This makes the costs emotionally protected from scrutiny. Over time, this creates a situation where savings are treated as leftover money rather than a deliberate priority. Whatever remains at the end of the month gets saved, if anything does. This approach almost guarantees slow progress because modern life is very good at absorbing leftovers. There's always something that can use the extra cash: a repair, a trip, an upgrade, an unexpected bill. Saving becomes optional by default, and optional things tend to be postponed. The long-term impact of this pattern is subtle but profound. Without reaching that first $100,000, compounding never gets the chance to meaningfully participate. Investments exist, but they feel fragile. Market fluctuations feel stressful rather than exciting. The portfolio isn't large enough to generate confidence or flexibility. Every financial decision still depends heavily on earned income. Time keeps passing, but money isn't accelerating. This is why so many people feel like they're working hard but standing still. It's not because they're failing. It's because the structure of their financial life prioritizes stability and comfort over momentum. Stability is valuable, comfort matters. But when these are achieved by locking in high fixed costs too early, they crowd out the very surplus that allows wealth to grow. Understanding this doesn't require shame or drastic action. It requires clarity, seeing that the first $100,000 is less about investment brilliance and more about preserving enough financial flexibility early on. Enough room for money to accumulate before it's consumed. Enough patience to delay certain upgrades until the foundation is strong. This shift in perspective is where financially intelligent behavior begins, not with deprivation but with intention. Once this pattern is established, it tends to repeat itself quietly year after year without anyone consciously deciding to stay financially stuck. This is where psychology becomes more important than spreadsheets. The real challenge isn't that people don't understand money in theory. Most working adults know they should save more, avoid high-interest debt, and think long-term. The challenge is that the financial system they operate in rewards short-term comfort and social alignment far more than delayed financial progress. And the human mind, left to its natural tendencies, almost always follows the path of least resistance. One of the most powerful forces at work here is adaptation. Humans adapt quickly to improvements in their environment. A new apartment that once felt spacious becomes normal within months. A car payment that initially felt expensive becomes background noise. A higher salary that once felt life-changing gets absorbed into routine. This adaptation dulls the sense of progress, even as consumption increases, so the brain looks for the next upgrade to recreate that feeling of advancement. The result is a cycle where earning more doesn't lead to feeling more secure, only to maintaining a slightly higher baseline. At the same time, time itself creates a false sense of safety. When someone is in their 20s or early 30s, the future feels distant. There's an unspoken assumption that there will be plenty of time later to get serious about money. 10 years feels like an abstract concept, not a countdown. This makes it easy to postpone hard decisions, but wealth is unusually sensitive to timing. A dollar saved at 25 behaves very differently from a dollar saved at 45. The difference isn't just the number of years it can compound, it's the flexibility it creates in life choices. To see this clearly, imagine two people with similar incomes and similar careers. One manages to build $100,000 in net worth by their mid-30s. The other reaches only $30,000 by the same age. The gap between them isn't just $70,000. It's the set of options that money represents. The first person can absorb a job loss without panic. They can take a lower-paying role for better work-life balance. They can invest through market downturns without fear. The second person, despite earning well, remains dependent on each paycheck. Their decisions are constrained even if their lifestyle looks comparable on the surface. What makes this especially tricky is that the cost of not reaching the first $100,000 doesn't show up as a dramatic failure. Life continues, careers progress, people appear fine, but the financial trajectory flattens. Without a meaningful asset base, each year becomes a repetition of the last. Income comes in, expenses go out, small savings accumulate slowly. Retirement feels far away and vaguely stressful, but not urgent enough to change behavior. This is how decades pass without financial momentum ever really forming. There's also an emotional cost to this pattern. Constant financial tightness, even at decent income levels, creates low-grade stress, not panic but a background tension. Decisions feel heavier, unexpected expenses feel disruptive, investing feels risky rather than routine. Over time, this stress shapes behavior. People become more conservative with opportunities and more defensive with money, which ironically makes growth even harder. When money feels scarce, even if it objectively isn't, the mind shifts into protection mode instead of growth mode. Another psychological trap is the belief that wealth building requires extreme sacrifice. Many people look at their current lifestyle and conclude that meaningful saving would require giving up everything they enjoy. This belief often isn't true, but it feels true because the financial picture hasn't been examined calmly and honestly. When money is managed reactively, any attempt to save feels like deprivation. When it's managed intentionally, trade-offs feel deliberate. The difference is subtle but powerful. This is where financially intelligent people diverge, not in income but in mindset. They tend to view money as a tool for creating future stability rather than immediate validation. This doesn't mean they live joyless lives or avoid comfort entirely. It means they are unusually aware of the long-term cost of fixed commitments. They're careful about what they lock in, especially early on. They understand that flexibility is a form of wealth, even if it doesn't show up in a lifestyle comparison. They also tend to think in terms of thresholds rather than continuous upgrades. Reaching the first $100,000 is seen as a structural shift, not just a number. It's the point where money starts to assist rather than resist progress. Before that point, effort does most of the work. After it, compounding begins to matter psychologically as well as mathematically. Watching investments grow, even modestly, changes how people relate to time and risk. It builds patience. Ignoring this shift doesn't lead to disaster, but it does lead to stagnation. And stagnation is hard to notice when everyone around is moving at the same slow pace. This is why the majority fail to reach that first milestone, not because they couldn't, but because nothing in their environment forces them to question the default path. The system works well enough to keep them comfortable, but not well enough to make them free. Awareness of this loop is the first step out of it. Not awareness in the sense of guilt or urgency, but clarity. Seeing that time, not income, is the most valuable input. Seeing that early financial decisions echo for decades. And seeing that wealth at its core is less about what you earn and more about what you allow to quietly accumulate. Once people truly see this pattern, something subtle but important begins to change. Not in their bank balance overnight and not in their lifestyle immediately, but in how they interpret everyday financial decisions. Financially intelligent people don't possess secret information or superior discipline. What sets them apart is the framework they use to evaluate choices. They don't ask, "Can I afford this?" in the short-term sense. They ask, often unconsciously, "What does this delay?" Every recurring expense, every long-term commitment is measured against the time it steals from reaching financial independence, stability, or flexibility. This shift in perspective is especially visible in how they treat fixed costs. While most people optimize variable spending, looking for cheaper groceries or occasional discounts, financially intelligent individuals focus on the few large decisions that shape cash flow for years. Housing, transportation, and long-term debt are approached with restraint, not because they fear spending, but because they understand permanence. A higher rent isn't just more money this month, it's a permanent reduction in saving capacity. A car payment isn't just transportation, it's a multi-year claim on future income. What's interesting is that this mindset often looks conservative or even unambitious from the outside. Living in a smaller apartment than peers, driving an older car despite earning well, delaying visible upgrades, but internally it feels the opposite. There's a quiet sense of control that comes from knowing most income isn't already allocated. That flexibility creates psychological breathing room. It allows saving to happen first, not last, and it makes progress feel tangible even if the lifestyle appears modest. Another important difference is how financially intelligent people think about effort versus leverage. They understand that there is a ceiling to how much effort alone can accomplish. Working harder can increase income, but only temporarily and often at the cost of time and energy. Leverage, on the other hand, comes from letting money compound over time. This requires patience and restraint early on, precisely when social pressure to consume is strongest. They accept that the early phase feels slow and even boring. They don't interpret this as failure, they see it as the nature of the process. This is also why they are less reactive to income increases. When their salary goes up, they don't automatically translate that into lifestyle upgrades. Instead, they often treat raises as invisible, not in a moralistic way but in a practical one. If the money never becomes part of the lifestyle, it never becomes missed. This is how saving rates quietly rise without feeling painful. Over time, this creates a widening gap between income and spending, the exact gap that fuels wealth building. Emotionally, this approach is calmer. There's less comparison, less urgency to signal success, less anxiety about keeping up. Financially intelligent people tend to compare themselves to their past selves, not to peers. Progress is measured in increased net worth, reduced dependence on income, and growing optionality. These metrics are private, which makes them less tempting to inflate artificially. There's no applause for a higher savings rate, but there's also no pressure to perform. As the first $100,000 approaches, something else shifts. Decisions feel lighter, market volatility becomes less threatening. Saving no longer feels like pushing a boulder uphill. The system starts working with you. Returns, even modest ones, reinforce patience. Time stops feeling like an enemy and starts feeling like an asset. This psychological change is difficult to overstate. It's the moment when people realize that wealth isn't built through intensity, but through consistency. Crucially, financially intelligent people don't frame this as sacrifice. They frame it as sequencing. Some comforts are delayed, not denied. The goal isn't minimalism or austerity. It's alignment, using money in a way that supports long-term stability rather than undermining it. This is why they rarely talk about discipline or willpower. Those concepts imply constant struggle. In reality, once the structure is right, behavior follows naturally. From the outside, the difference between someone who reaches their first $100,000 and someone who doesn't often looks small. The same job, similar income, similar daily routines, but under the surface, one person is slowly building financial mass while the other is maintaining equilibrium. Over decades, that difference compounds into entirely different lives, not necessarily in luxury, but in freedom. Understanding this perspective doesn't require dramatic changes. It requires seeing money less as a reward for effort and more as a resource to be positioned carefully. Once that shift happens, progress becomes quiet, steady, and surprisingly resilient. By the time someone fully understands why the first $100,000 is the hardest, the number itself often starts to feel less important than what it represents. It's not a finish line, it's a transition point. Before it, money requires constant input of effort and attention. After it, money begins to provide stability, margin, and quiet support. The tragedy isn't that most people never become wealthy in a dramatic sense. It's that many never experience this transition at all, despite having the capacity to reach it. What holds them back is rarely a single bad decision. It's the accumulation of reasonable choices made without a long-term frame. A slightly higher rent that felt justified, a car upgrade that felt earned, a willingness to carry debt because everyone does. None of these are moral failures. They're the natural outcome of living in an economy designed to normalize consumption and defer consequences. Understanding this allows people to reflect without shame. And reflection, not pressure, is what creates meaningful change. There's something quietly powerful about realizing that financial progress doesn't require intensity or constant optimization. It requires space. Space in the budget, space in time, space in attention. When expenses are allowed to grow until they match income, that space disappears. When some of that growth is intentionally delayed, the space reappears. And in that space, saving becomes easier, investing becomes calmer, and decisions become less reactive. The people who eventually cross that first $100,000 threshold don't do it through dramatic turns or sudden insight. They do it by making a small number of structurally sound choices early enough for time to work. They don't fight the system head-on. They quietly step around its incentives. They let normality work in their favor rather than against them. Over years, this creates a sense of quiet confidence that doesn't depend on income or status. For those who haven't reached that point yet, there's no need for urgency or self-criticism. Awareness alone changes behavior over time. Simply seeing how fixed costs shape financial trajectories alters how future decisions feel. What once seemed harmless begins to carry weight. What once felt restrictive begins to feel protective. This shift doesn't happen overnight, but once it starts, it tends to persist. The broader takeaway is simple and unemotional. Wealth is less about how much you make and more about how early you preserve room for it to grow. The first $100,000 is hard because it requires resisting the urge to convert every improvement in income into immediate lifestyle upgrades. It asks for patience in a culture that rewards immediacy. Not forever, just long enough for momentum to form. If this perspective helped you see your own situation more clearly, you may want to stay with this channel. These conversations aren't about shortcuts or promises. They're about understanding money well enough to stop feeling confused by it. If that sounds useful, consider subscribing.